Hi, friends. Welcome back to Rapture and Chill. I'm Brooke, and thank you so much for being here. Fun things happening this week, huh? The World Cup started, and I don't know about you, but I'm living for the content. All of the people visiting the US for the first time from other countries and actually having good experiences has made me breathe a sigh of relief. Overall, it's not a wild take to say that the US isn't exactly beloved right now, so I'm hopeful that this will revitalize us a little bit because we definitely have a lot to offer, more than our government. Plus, it feels really good to cheer for the home team, and I have to admit, it's been a while since I felt patriotic. Also, this weekend, Stevie and I went to see Disclosure Day, which was another sigh of relief, actually, because it wasn't at all what I was worried it would be. Emily Blunt was, first of all, incredible. And the movie itself was so good, I cried, which I actually wasn't expecting to do, but I won't spoil anything for you. I also saw that they have officially named the crew for the Artemis 3 expedition to the moon. Very interesting. Of course, they're just planning to orbit the moon again, no lunar landing, and I kind of wish they would just admit that whatever is on the dark side of the moon doesn't want us there, and that's why we haven't landed on the moon again, or ever, probably. Anyway, all this talk recently about Artemis got me curious about its namesake. I mean, if anyone represented rejecting the Matrix, it's Artemis. And I absolutely loved researching her story. Here is episode 9, Queen of the In-Between, Artemis Uncharted. Okay, guys, Artemis is famously the twin sister of Apollo and a daughter of Zeus. And as we know, Zeus was not a creator god, but he was definitely a procreator god, if you catch my drift. As a result of one of his many extramarital affairs, he got a Titan goddess named Leto pregnant. His wife Hera went full on Real Housewives of Mount Olympus and banned Leto from giving birth on any solid earth or island attached to the world's seafloor. Thankfully, Leto was able to get to a tiny floating rock called Delos, but Hera didn't stop at banishment. She also kidnapped Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth and labor pains, so she couldn't hear Leto's screams, which meant that Leto wasn't able to actually deliver the babies. She was in labor for 9 days and nights until Eileithyia was able to get to Delos and basically open the birth gates. There are a couple of different versions of the whole labor story, but one of them is particularly wild. One version says that Artemis was born on the first of the 9 days, and that she immediately stood up and started comforting her mother through the remainder of her excruciating labor with Apollo. What makes it even crazier is that she was a goddess of midwifery herself in a slightly different way than Eileithyia. So her very first act as a midwife was actually delivering her twin brother. Obviously, gods don't age on a normal human timeline. They're fully grown pretty much instantly. So their adolescent phase is super quick. The twins were archery prodigies at just days old, and it was impossible for Zeus to ignore their existence. They were too special. He had Leto, Artemis, and Apollo move into the palace on Mount Olympus, which I'm sure was extra awkward since Hera tried to have Leto and the twins killed multiple times after they were born. Yikes. But Artemis had her own plan for her life. When she was physically a small child, but mentally already fully developed, she crawled up into her dad's lap and made a list of birthday demands. These are her 6 wishes: eternal virginity, a plethora of names, a silver bow and arrow, a short hunting tunic, an entourage of nymphs, and her own wilderness. And I want to elaborate on these a little bit because they're important. First of all, eternal virginity didn't just mean she never wanted to copulate. It meant she would never be forced into marriage or motherhood. It meant that she had complete sovereignty over her own body and life, and she would be totally independent. So, yeah, it did also mean that she would never have to deal with men putting their funky hands on her. Her second wish was a plethora of names. She wanted to be multifaceted and have many different titles so that she could never be boxed into just one single role or archetype. Then she asked that the silver bow and arrows be crafted specifically for her by the Cyclopses. The hunting tunic needed to be short because she wanted to be able to move freely. And the heavy floor-length gowns that the other goddesses wore weren't practical for her. She specifically asked for nymphs because they're nature spirits, so they loved the wilderness just like she did. They weren't immortal gods, but they weren't human either. They were divine beings, female, that could potentially live for thousands of years, always staying young and beautiful. So she had 60 ocean nymphs to serve as her closest caretakers and companions, and 20 river nymphs to care for her hunting dogs and gear. In order to be part of her squad, though, they had to take the same vow of chastity and independence that she did. If someone tried to seduce one of her nymphs, she would fiercely protect them. But if they broke the vow willingly, they were banished from the wilderness. And that wilderness, the final demand that Artemis made of Zeus, was her domain. She didn't want a kingdom or a civilization to rule over. She wanted untouched, untamed wilderness. She said she would only venture into a city if a woman was screaming in labor and needed her help. Remember, she was a midwife and a goddess of midwifery. Zeus gave her everything that she asked for and more, including 30 towns devoted to worshiping her. And he made her the guardian of roads and harbors, which we'll talk more about later. First, we need to look at the absolute force that Artemis was, along with Apollo. One of the unfortunate consequences of having children with a married man and then moving in with his existing family is that people aren't exactly stoked on your existence. Leto caught a lot of grief, and the twins were understandably very protective of their mother. And same, by the way. Plus, I'm very likable. I'd do fine in jail, probably. Queen Niobe of Thebes learned her lesson the hard way. Niobe was human, but she was married to King Amphion, a son of Zeus. She had 14 children, 7 girls and 7 boys, known as the Niobids. Having that many healthy, not to mention royal children, was a huge flex, and apparently she held quite a bit of contempt for Leto. During a religious festival in Thebes, citizens were gathering to burn incense and offer sacrifices to the Titan goddess Leto and pray for protection. Niobe crashed the ceremony and made some disgusting remarks to the crowd about how Leto didn't deserve to be worshipped because she only had 2 children, which she birthed on a tiny rock, whereas Niobe had 14. Even if a handful of Niobe's kids died, she'd still have more than Leto's measly 2. And Leto heard all of that. She told the twins, and they immediately went to defend her honor. They cloaked themselves in dark clouds and sneaked into the city. As Niobe's 7 sons were training in a field outside the city gates, Apollo picked them off one by one. When King Amphion found out, he took his own life. Niobe became angry in her grief and screamed to the heavens that Leto had not won because she still had 7 daughters. And then, as the 7 daughters held the bodies of their brothers, Artemis killed all of them too. Niobe was so destroyed by grief that she became hardened. Literally, though, she turned to stone. Artemis didn't need Apollo's help every time, though. Otis and Ephialtes were giants, half human, half god. Every year, they grew at an insane rate. These guys were like skyscraper big. And so were their egos. They came up with a plan to overthrow Mount Olympus, destroy the gods, kidnap Hera, and then force Artemis into marriage. Brilliant idea, right? How could that possibly go wrong? They were actually successful initially. They stacked mountains on top of one another to build a huge ladder from Earth up to Mount Olympus. And they were so freaking huge that they had a fairly easy time overpowering the gods. Even Ares got stuffed into a jar. It's like a high school kid getting stuffed in a locker, which is not funny. Eventually, they made their way to the wilderness, and Artemis was ready. She didn't engage in a bloody battle or even recruit any help. Instead, she tricked them, because bigger does not mean smarter. She transformed herself into a beautiful white stag or deer, ran between the brothers, and stopped there to let them have a little look-see. Both brothers were so overwhelmed by their own arrogance and blinded by greed that they each threw a spear at the stag at the exact same time. They were each so hell-bent on being the first one to bag the rare white deer that they didn't even notice they were throwing their spears towards each other. As soon as the spears left their hands, Artemis vanished, poof, and then the spears pierced the brothers' hearts. They killed each other on an expedition to find Artemis and force her into marriage. Honestly, in this case, I think the punishment fit the crime. Anyway, earlier, I mentioned that Artemis was the guardian of roads and harbors. There's a direct correlation between that and her role as a goddess of midwifery. It's all about liminal spaces. Like she represented and was the guardian of the in between transitional spaces and stages. Literally and metaphorically, physically and metaphysically, birth canal or highway, Artemis ruled thresholds, not kingdoms. She was like the ultimate enforcer of boundaries. I seriously just have to interject to say again how much I love her story. She was like a divine game warden. She protected baby animals, managed predators, and really kept the entire ecosystem balanced. Hunting for food was allowed, but hunting out of greed was not. Or harming a mother animal nursing her babies under the jail. But those predators aren't the only ones that she punished. Remember when I said that she would fiercely protect her nymphs? Well, the most famous example of this is the story of Actaeon, a mortal. He took his pack of 50 hunting dogs into the woods, and he accidentally stumbled upon Artemis and her nymphs bathing in a sacred grotto. Instead of at least feigning respect by apologizing and turning his head away, he stayed and watched like a freaking voyeur. So gross. When Artemis realized what he was doing, she threw water in his face, and it immediately turned him into a deer. Unfortunately for Actaeon, his hunting dogs didn't recognize him anymore, so you can imagine how that ended for him. But when approached with respect and humility, Artemis reacted quite differently. On one occasion, she and her mother Leto were out on a hunting expedition deep in the mountains of Crete when they bumped into Orion. He was the son of Poseidon and a human princess, so he was technically Artemis and Apollo's cousin because remember, Zeus and Poseidon were brothers. If he had done what Actaeon did, I don't think it would have mattered that Artemis and Orion shared Olympian DNA. He would have been dog food too, but he didn't. He and Artemis clicked instantly when she realized that he was the only mortal man she'd ever met who she would consider an equal. They had the same instinct and love for nature, the same skill and drive for the hunt. And he also had his own hunting dog named Sirius. And Orion was totally in sync with him, which obviously is a major green flag. Artemis and Orion spent all their time training, competing, and hunting, pushing each other to excel at their shared craft. At night, they would gather with Leto and the nymphs like their own little sacred community. Some of the later writings portrayed Artemis and Orion as lovers, but I truly don't buy that. Just like with Mary Magdalene, men tried to rewrite the narrative way after the original writings. She did not want a man. She didn't need a man. She did enjoy his company, though. He was her best friend, and Apollo was threatened by that. He thought for sure that Artemis would fall prey to Orion's charm and good looks, and that Artemis would break her vow of sovereignty. One day, while Orion was swimming far out at sea, Apollo saw his head bobbing above the water, and he challenged Artemis and her archery skills by goading her into shooting that distant speck out in the water. She aimed her silver bow, shot a silver arrow, and pierced the dot. She didn't know what she'd done until Orion's body floated up to shore later, and she was absolutely heartbroken. Her own brother, her twin, had manipulated her into killing her most trusted companion because her brother didn't trust her to keep her own vow. To ensure Orion would be safe out of earthly reach forever, Artemis lifted him up and placed him among the stars as a constellation right next to Sirius. Orion's death changed Artemis and further hardened her resolve. She retreated even deeper into the wilderness and became completely unyielding in her role as its guardian. We see this later during the Trojan War. King Agamemnon was the leader of the Greek army, and he had a fleet of thousands of ships at a harbor called Aulis. While he was there, Agamemnon decided to go hunting, and unfortunately for him, he did that in a grove that was sacred to Artemis. Not only did he kill one of her stags, but he bragged about it, saying not even Artemis could have made a shot like that. I would like to get Orion's opinion on that. Artemis didn't just kill Agamemnon and end it there, though. She actually clowned him pretty hard. She stopped the wind so that the entire Greek army fleet was stranded in the harbor. The army's seer or prophet told Agamemnon that in order for Artemis to bring the winds back, he would have to sacrifice his eldest daughter, Princess Iphigenia. And he agreed to do it. He seriously craved power so much that he brought his own daughter to the altar to be sacrificed. What he didn't know is that Artemis actually had no intention of letting an innocent girl die. Now, it's unclear whether it was Agamemnon or the seer who was holding the knife, but right as it was coming down, Artemis swapped Iphigenia for a deer. She carried Iphigenia away to the land of Taurus and made her the high priestess of her temple there, where she would have complete sovereignty and safety in the wild. Artemis proved that it's possible to love deeply and protect fiercely without having to compromise the vows that she made to herself. And as much as losing Orion did change her, it didn't break her. And I don't know about you, but from now on, when I see Orion's belt in the sky, I'll definitely be thinking of Artemis and how she rejected the Matrix and did it her way. All right, guys. So the moral of the story here obviously is respect nature and also respect my mama. Just kidding. No, I'm not. Anyway, I've been thinking about how I've been doing this for almost or around 10 weeks. And on one hand, it feels like it's flown by, but on the other hand, it feels like so much has happened in the world in the past 10 weeks. I know I've talked multiple times about how the chaos of the world has wound humanity so tight and swung the pendulum so high that things would inevitably have to shift soon. Doesn't it feel like it started? It really does to me. Obviously, our world leaders are still doing what they're doing, but I mean, on the human level, like you and me or whoever, it feels like humanity is really starting to consciously try to reconnect. The energy's starting to feel different. I wish I knew how to explain it better. Things just feel lighter, and I know that that is not just a me thing. I'm excited about it. And for the record, none of what I said is meant to diminish the severity of the horrors taking place in the Middle East or anywhere else. I just want to be a positive force. There's so much negativity already, and I think more positive energy can only be a good thing. So please, please, please keep at it. I will see you guys next week for the last episode of our first season. Make sure you go see Disclosure Day. It was really good. And make sure that you have some chill with your rapture. Okay, I love you. Bye.